Welcome everyone to a special board meeting of the Warren County Board of Supervisors. Please rise while I lead you in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read the roll.
Mr. Leggett? Mr. Diamond?
Here.
Mr. McDevitt?
Here.
Ms. Bramer? Mr. Loeb?
Here.
Mr. Driscoll?
Here.
Mrs. Frazier? Here. Mr. Simpson?
Here.
Ms. Hogan? Here. Mr. Dickinson?
Here.
Mr. Merlino?
Here.
Mr. Strauss?
Here.
Mr. Wild?
Here.
Mr. Beatty?
Here.
Mr. McGowan?
Here.
Mr. Sokol?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Ms. Hyde? Here. Mr. Garrity?
Here.
Chairman Conover?
Here. We have one order of business on the agenda for today, and it is resolution number 4, home rule request by Warren County for the enactment of Senate Bill numbers S721 and Assembly Bill number A210. I'll ask Ryan Moore, our County Administrator, just to explain what this is.
Yes, as you recall, back in December, the county introduced a local law to allow the extension of a piece of our mortgage tax, which expired December 1st last year due to the inability of the state legislature to pass that bill in both houses. This is a required resolution. It's a home rule request. Any county that is affected by this legislation needs to pass this resolution and get it down to Albany as soon as possible, because it's a prerequisite for both houses voting on this bill. So we decided to do it today, the earliest possible opportunity, with the idea of getting the forms down to Albany tomorrow so they can advance the bill.
Is there anyone from the public that is here to address the Board of Supervisors regarding this resolution? There being no one, I'll now ask, is there an interest in a roll call on this resolution? No roll call? I will open it to discussion. Is there discussion on this resolution from the board? There being none, I will close the discussion, and I'll call for the question. All those in favor of the resolution signify, excuse me. I'll move it. We don't need it moved. It's on the agenda. We don't need it moved. Thank you, Supervisor Strauss. I'll call the question then. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And now we'll move right into the workshop session, which was called to discuss sales tax distributions in Warren County. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to Ryan Moore, our County Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I want to do is apologize. This is a very lengthy and detailed presentation because this is a complex issue to understand. There's a lot of pieces to this. So I hope you had your coffee today. Secondly, I'd like to thank...
I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, do you have copies of this presentation by chance for the board?
I don't, because I just finished it. But I will circulate copies after the meeting.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Secondly, thank you to all the board members who have spent hours and hours talking to me about your points of view with regard to this issue. Thanks also to members of the public who've done the same and who've weighed in. I've tried to incorporate everybody's point of view into this. I don't have a horse in the race. It's my job to explain the issue, give the current distribution formula some historical context, make sure everybody understands fully how it works, and compare it to the 50-50 proposal that's been advanced and circulated already among this board. There have also been a couple of other proposals given to me in recent days by various members of the board, and I'll briefly address those at the end of the presentation. Thank you, and again, I apologize if this gets a little dry. So the first thing I wanted to address is how the sales tax is currently distributed according to our formula. For sales tax that's generated within the city of Glens Falls, the city keeps half and the county keeps half. For sales tax generated outside the city limits, the county share is 50% and the rest is distributed to the towns and villages according to valuation, their proportion of the valuation of the land that's outside of the city limits. In addition, Glens Falls receives a special distribution of 2% of the county share of tax revenue generated both inside and outside the city of Glens Falls, and that is in recognition of the sewer district. Here were the numbers in 2017. Now, throughout this presentation, I'll use 2017 numbers because when I was putting this together, 2018 wasn't fully finalized yet. I wanted to give you the most updated statistics that showed actuals. So in 2017, within Glens Falls, a little over $6 million was generated. The city kept a little over $3 million, and the county kept over $3 million, same amount. Outside Glens Falls, $49 million was generated. The county share was half, $24.5, and $24.5 was the distribution to the towns and the village. The special Glens Falls distribution, again, comes out of both county shares. Our $24.5 raised outside the city, plus the $3 million raised inside the city. The total county share would be $27.6. 2% of that total was $552,000 that went to Glens Falls. So putting it all together, the county ended up with a little over $27 million to keep. The towns and the village had $24.5 distributed among the valuation formula, and Glens Falls ended up with $3.6 million. Why is sales tax distributed this way? Under state law, cities have the right to preempt, which means that a city can keep half of the sales tax revenue that's generated within its borders. It's a recognition that cities have unique expenses that can differ from towns and villages. The city of Glens Falls preempts and has done so almost since the beginning of when the local sales tax was originated here in Warren County. Pursuant to New York State tax law, Section 1262D1, when a city preempts, the county is legally compelled to distribute 50% of the sales tax revenue generated outside the city to the remaining municipalities according to their share of the aggregate equalized assessed valuation of property outside the city. In other words, state law mandates Warren County's current sales tax distribution formula, and a change in state law would likely be necessary to change this formula, depending on how that change is triggered. 10 out of 57 non-New York City counties have cities that preempt in this fashion, where within that county a city is preempting for the 3%. 8 of them distribute 50% of the non-city revenue according to the same valuation-based formula that we use. The other 2 use population, but the county keeps well over 50% of the non-city revenues in order to reduce county tax levy on the municipalities. Now, as one member of the public pointed out to me, this is not to say that only 2 counties in the state have a population-based distribution. Plenty of them have a population-based distribution, but I'm looking at the small subset of counties that are in the same position Warren County is. Saratoga County is one of them, where you have a city that preempts the 3%, which triggers the state valuation methodology to distribute the remaining 50%. So past analysis has been done on this issue in Warren County. Several years ago, the county had a sales tax allocation committee, worked with the state, the county treasurer, and the county attorney to identify alternative distributions. The committee was chaired by former Supervisor Bud Taylor. Members included Supervisor Dickinson, Merlino, Stroud, and former Supervisor Evelyn Wood. The committee met on January 21st, 2015, and discussed 3 options. There was a unanimous decision not to pursue any of the options. And the options were to distribute a portion of the county share, which can be done, in other words, the $27 million that I showed you earlier. We can distribute a portion of that, take it out of the county coffers, move it around to the municipalities. But this was rejected because it has the effect of a county property tax increase when you take that revenue out of the county budget. Number 2 was convince Glens Falls to no longer preempt and then negotiate a new distribution formula with all the municipalities. But the committee believed Glens Falls would need a strong financial incentive to do this because of the inherent risk of giving up preemption. If in 2017 Glens Falls hadn't preempted, their share with the changed valuation formula would have been about $500,000 lower than it ended up being. So why has this formula that we use now been characterized as unfair? There's many reasons. I hope I hit all of them here. The reason most prominently cited is that on a per capita basis, towns get back different amounts of sales tax revenue. And I'll go through them with you. Bolton gets back about 1,800. Chester, 547. Glens Falls, 245. Hague, over 2,000. Horicon, 1,153. Johnsburg, 462. Lake George, inside the village, 661. Outside the village, almost 900. Lake Luzerne, 286. Queensbury, 320. Stony Creek, 417. Thurman, 329. And Warrensburg, 203. Municipalities that receive lower sales tax distributions also do not have as much revenue to use in balancing their municipal budget. Below are the percentages of distributed sales tax that each municipality received in 2017. Bolton got almost 15% of it. Chester, 6.5%. Glens Falls, almost 13%, and so on. Not to rush this, but also not to put you to sleep. The largest percentage of the revenue went to Queensbury, 31.7%. And here's the others. Pause here, give you a chance to digest it. You'll see this a similar distribution again in future slides. It has also been noted that over time, the changing valuations have resulted in some towns, the ones with the increasing property values, especially the lake towns, picking up larger percentages of sales tax revenue at the expense of other towns, those with decreasing or steady property values. And I want to switch very briefly to a separate presentation. The caveat, I did not put these numbers together, so I can't fully verify them. But many of the supervisors certainly have seen these graphs. This shows that since 1970, Bolton's share of the sales tax revenue has gone up from about 10% to about 17%. There's Horicon. And Queensbury has fluctuated, but on the whole, where it was in 1970, percentage it got in 2016 is a bit lower. Go back to the PowerPoint. So conclusions so far. Looking at only the revenue that's received by municipalities from the county, there are apparent disparities. A high-value town with a small population like Bolton takes in 15% of the revenue, even though they have 3.5% of the people, so their per capita revenue is high. A high-value town with a large population like Queensbury gets 32% of the revenue, but their per capita revenue is on the lower end because they have 42% of the population. Even though their slice of the pie is the largest, they got more people to, parcel it out to if you want to look at per capita. A town with lower values and a larger population like Warrensburg gets 3% of the revenue despite having double the population, so their per capita revenue looks very low. Towns that get lower sales tax distributions have less revenue to apply against their town budgets for the purpose of reducing the town property tax levy. That's one of the most common arguments that proponents of changing the formula have made. The expense liability to the county also matters. So in addition to sales tax revenue received by municipalities from the county and how it affects their municipal levy, analysis of what makes a sales tax distribution formula fair or unfair also must take into account the expense liability that taxpayers in each municipality have for services that are provided at the county level. In other words, the county tax levy. And there's a historical reason for this, which is Medicaid. It's the most expensive single program provided at the county level. 1965. I promise this is relevant. In 1965, the federal government created Medicaid. The program was to be funded 50% by Washington, 50% by the states. New York immediately decided to split the state share with the counties. To this day, compared with other states, the county share of Medicaid is the highest in New York by far. New York didn't want to place the burden of paying for Medicaid on either local property taxpayers or state income taxpayers. So in 1965, as a way to create a new shared state and local revenue source to pay for Medicaid, which was a new shared state and local expense obligation, New York enacted the state sales tax and at the same time authorized counties to enact local sales taxes. The local sales tax was created to be a county revenue that pays for a county service, Medicaid. The impact of Medicaid in those initial years was enormous on counties. Warren County Board meeting minutes from the time mention that Senator Bobby Kennedy was attempting to pass legislation shifting costs away from areas like upstate New York to urban areas that had greater means to pay the bill. The impact of Medicaid was also hard to predict. Here in Warren County in 1967, the actual Medicaid expenditures far exceeded appropriations, and this Board of Supervisors had to borrow in order to pay the rest of the bill. Now, the debt service associated with those notes was included in the 1968 budget, and this was the backdrop against which this county adopted a 3% sales tax in late 1967. The business community of Warren County testified at board meetings at the time strongly in favor of the sales tax because in their estimation, paying for Medicaid through property taxes would be devastating. So Warren County adopted the 3% local tax and kept 100% of the revenue until Glens Falls preempted, and that forced the adoption of the current distribution formula, which we've had since 1971. Currently, 12 out of the 57 non-New York City counties still keep 100% of the local sales tax in order to pay for county services. So here's what the state law says. Medicaid is still the single most expensive program in the county budget. Article 7 of the county law lays out how you put together a county budget. Property tax levy is the final element that's calculated in that process. It's supposed to be the revenue of last resort. So in other words, when you have to adopt a balanced budget, you figure out all your expenses and your expense reductions, figure out all your revenues, including sales tax revenue and your appropriated fund balance, and the gap between the total revenues and the total expenses is the county property tax levy. Why is this relevant? County sales tax revenue is a major determinant of the property tax levy. When county sales tax revenue decreases, the deficit between appropriations and revenues increases, and the property tax levy necessary to balance the budget must also increase. The distribution of county sales tax revenue to municipalities therefore means that the county loses revenue, which would otherwise pay for county programs, including Medicaid. The county has to replace this revenue dollar for dollar with county property tax revenue. Same tax law section that dictates our current distribution also has this clause. It says that the sales tax distribution to municipalities by default is to be applied to reduce the county property tax that's levied upon those same municipalities. This is verbatim from the law. The amount allocated to each town shall be applied first to reduce county taxes levied upon real property in such town, and any balance remaining shall be applied to reduce general town taxes levied upon real estate. Why is the law written this way? Again, because of how the local sales tax originated. It was created to fund a county program. When the revenue gets pulled out of a county budget because the city preempted, the county has to replace it by levying county property taxes. So applying the sales tax distribution in the first instance to reduce these property taxes is a way to protect property taxpayers from paying for programs like Medicaid that were not necessarily intended to fall to them. It must, however, be noted, in the spirit of home rule, this same section of the law gives municipalities the authority to take sales tax revenue into their municipal budgets instead for the purpose of offsetting municipal property taxes. All municipalities in Warren County currently do this. Queensbury, for example, began doing it in 1978. In doing this, a municipality is choosing to reduce the municipal levy by X number of dollars, and in exchange, its residents are paying an equivalent X number of dollars more in county property taxes. I raise this point because it's commonplace for all of us to consider the sales tax revenue as an offset to the county tax, but it didn't start that way. It was initially intended to be an offset to the county tax, again, home rule allows municipalities to treat that revenue differently if they want. I want to go through this example because I think it raises an important point. If you have a hypothetical town that owes the tax levy for the county is supposed to be $900,000, they get a sales tax distribution of $300,000, and their town budget's going to require $500,000 in town taxes to balance. The default position under state law is that the $300,000 would be applied to reduce the county tax levy. So the town ends up with a reduced county tax liability of $600,000 and a town tax liability of $500,000 for a total of $1.1 million in property taxes. Now, most municipalities here in the county will do it this way. The town chooses to take the full sales tax distribution into the town budget. So the town ends up with a county tax liability of $900,000. That doesn't change. But the town tax liability is reduced from $500,000 to $200,000. But again, the residents in that town are still paying $1.1 million in property taxes, $900,000 plus $200,000. The third example, 3 of our towns do this. They take most of the sales tax revenue into their municipal budget, and they use a smaller part of the sales tax revenue to reduce the county tax liability on their residents. And the example that we could use is, let's say, $250,000 of the $300,000 the town decides to keep. So the town, the county tax levy in that town goes from $900,000 to $850,000. Residents have some savings on the county side. And then the town tax liability reduces from $500,000 down to $250,000. But again, $850,000 plus $250,000, the residents of that town are still paying $1.1 million in property taxes. Conclusions. No matter how the town in that previous slide chose to apply its sales tax distribution, the residents of that town always ended up with the same overall tax liability of $1.1 million. So when a town chooses to use sales tax revenue to reduce town taxes, the county tax levy on that town's residents is increased by the exact same amount. The conclusion that I think a reasonable person has to draw from this is that looking at just sales tax revenue and municipal tax levy is not looking at the full picture. You really got to also consider the the expense liability on your residents of the county tax levy. So let's look at the 2017 county property tax levy. State law, as everybody here knows, requires that the county property tax levy is apportioned according to valuation. The $42.5 million that was levied to pay for county programs in 2017 was paid by property owners of each municipality based not on how they utilized the programs, whether or not they utilized programs at the county level, but based on their municipality's property valuation. So, as an example, road paving projects, they're not charged out to the towns in which the work is done. Safety net payments used to be known as welfare. They're not charged back to the towns where the recipients live, although legally they could be, and they are in some counties. Warren chooses not to do that. These programs are instead paid for by property taxpayers in each municipality in proportion with their municipality's property values. These are the percentages, the pie chart of who paid the county property tax in 2017. Bolton paid a little over 15, Chester 7. Again, Glens Falls 9.2. Queensbury again paid the largest share, 33. Very similar to the chart we looked at earlier in terms of where the sales tax revenue lands. The percentages in that slide are important because they apply to all county services that are funded by property taxes. So to go back to the two examples, it doesn't matter where a social services client lived. Queensbury taxpayers paid 33% of the bill. Bolton taxpayers paid 15% of the bill. And Glens Falls taxpayers paid 9% of the bill. Doesn't matter which towns got new blacktop on their county roads. Queensbury taxpayers paid 33, Bolton 15, and Glens Falls 9. How much on a per capita basis? Bolton 2,800 for county services. Chester 860. Again, not to drone on and give you read off every single dollar amount, but you can see the variation. There's Queensbury 502, Stony Creek, and Warrensburg 319. Paid to the county versus received from the county. The share that property tax owners paid to support county programs is very close to the share of the sales tax revenue, as I mentioned when we looked at the pie chart. There's the proportion of property taxes paid in each town. There's the sales tax revenue that each town gets back from the county. The per capita sales tax revenue, same thing. It follows the same pattern as the per capita expense paid for county programs. The towns that receive less sales tax revenue also have less expense liability for county programs, and the towns that receive more sales tax revenue shoulder more of the costs of county government. Here they are. Per capita expense obligations from residents of each town versus the per capita amount that the town gets back in the sales tax distribution. Conclusions. Property owners in every municipality pay for county programs through the property tax. Their municipalities in turn receive sales tax revenue from the county. If you subtract the sales tax revenue received from the county property tax exposure that each town has, it'll give you a measure of the net cost of county government for each municipality. So in yes.
I just wanted to make sure I have this down. So in that comparison back there, you had the percentage of county expense paid by municipality.
Mm-hmm.
So you had Bolton at 15% with about 2,200 residents, and Glens Falls at 9% with about 14 plus or minus 1,000 residents. I'm not sure.
It's because the expense side of the equation doesn't take into account population. The expense side of the equation is based solely on valuation. That's how we apportion what county government costs. Well, I'll make a point about the percentages in a few more slides. Okay. So in 2017, what was the net cost of county government? The first column is the property tax levy, the expense obligation that each town had for county programs. The second column is the sales tax distribution revenue that they got back. The first minus the second, the column highlighted in yellow, gives you the net cost of county government. Again, not in practice, we're not applying the revenues this way, but because of the slide I showed you earlier where no matter how you apply the revenues, the tax liability is the same, I'm taking a look at this way. I'm going to bring in the municipal taxes later on. Percentages. I say this not to make Glens Falls look bad. I say it just to illustrate a point. Every town right now is paying a larger percentage for county programs than they're getting back in sales tax other than Glens Falls. You ask why is that the case if they're both based on valuation formulas. That's strictly because of the special distribution to Glens Falls, which was done in recognition of extra costs that the city has that other areas of the county benefit from. So that $550,000 added onto Glens Falls, and it's taken out when you I apologize if I'm blabbering, but when you add up all of the revenues that are received, the denominator changes, so it will look like the percentage that all of the municipalities receive. It'll look like Glens Falls is lower and everybody else is higher, but that's only because of the special distribution. Sorry if that didn't make sense. Here's the pie chart. Again, Bolton 16.5, and it goes around the circle. The reason I mention that about percentages is, if anybody's wondering why Glens Falls goes to 2% when you're looking at the net, that's why, because they have the special distribution. Queensbury is up to 35, again, because of that special distribution. The other towns are kicking in for that. Effective cost of county government per capita, same pattern. Largest is in Hague, 1,182. Smallest, Glens Falls, 20 and change, almost 21. But again, that's because of the special distribution. Doesn't, yes?
Could you elaborate on that special distribution?
Yes.
The sewer district, which implies that there's an expense that's being shouldered by the city. Could you elaborate on that, please?
The special distribution started in 2002. The details of how the 2% was calculated and why, I don't know that I can speak to. If there's anybody on this board now that was here then, maybe you'd have a better idea. But the purpose of it was to acknowledge that something Glens Falls was doing was benefiting communities outside of Glens Falls.
That was I was coming on after it. I probably would have voted for it at the time when it was coming. It was just to pay some sewage that was leaving Queensbury to Glens Falls sewer treatment plant, and it basically was a good idea. But the only thing that they did wrong, and I believe we're doing things wrong today, was they put a percentage number on it. And when the percentage number came out, I don't have my numbers in front of me. It was like 275,000 that went to Glens Falls from the top of the sales tax revenue collected in this county. Over the years, that 275,000 now is 600,000. So by using a percentage, it really is costing all the taxpayers in Warren County more money instead of just an annual raise for, as things go up.
Yeah.
And that's where they're getting over 600. I think. Sorry, am I right on that? 600,000 from when it was decided to do 275,000.
Yeah. And again, I'm not passing judgment on that.
No, it was, I'm not saying it was
yeah.
wrong or right.
Yeah.
I probably would have voted on it myself. But learning that and learning about sales tax, percentages are tough because they keep going up and up.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to add a little bit to that conversation. In theory, during those negotiations, Mayor Regan was the mayor at that point in time. The concept was that as the city expands capacity, sewer capacity, there'd be an additional growth. So that percentage number was factored in based on growth. And as you see, if you took into consideration, say, Exit 18, for example, speaking with many of the new developers that are building hotels out there, as a result of the sewer capacity that the city provides and makes available, these hotels are being constructed. If you spoke with those entrepreneurs and said, would that fit your footprint on building a hotel that you have put septic in? It wouldn't. So as the capacity and as Queensbury and other communities continue to buy capacity, yes, the sales tax increases, but you're also collecting more sales tax and occupancy tax as a result of the contract. So that's why that percentage was negotiated to close that deal between Warren County and Town of Queensbury and the city.
Thank you. That's a great explanation. The special distribution, most of it is coming out of the county share. All of it actually is coming out of the county share. So it's a reduction in county revenue. It's replaced by property taxes. It's replaced, those property taxes are paid according to the valuation of each town. So again, Bolton pays 15% of it, Queensbury pays 33%, and so on and so on. Conclusions so far. Municipalities receive tax revenue from the county in a nearly equivalent proportion to the expense liability that their property owners shoulder for county programs. Every municipality pays for county programs, pays more rather for county programs than they receive back in sales tax revenue. City of Glens Falls comes closest to breaking even only because of the special distribution. By contrast, you have two lake towns, high-value towns, that are more than $1,000 per capita net cost in 2017. These disparities occur because both expense liability for the programs and the sales tax revenue distributed back is based purely on valuation. And this last point is a key point. The formula is designed this way to ensure that the high-value municipalities which have greater economic means are paying more for the services provided to all by the county government. So, pardon?
I said you should have highlighted that.
You want me to go back? Okay. The formulas are designed to ensure that the high-value municipalities which have greater economic means pay for the services provided to all by the county government.
Skip more. Pay more.
I try not to talk about myself. Okay. So the 50-50 proposal that's been circulated, these are the assumptions. Glens Falls would no longer preempt, which would add that sales tax revenue generated within the city to the pool of revenue that's distributed among the county to all the municipalities. County would retain 50% of the pool, less the 2%, the Glens Falls special distribution. The municipalities, including the city, would receive the other 50%. And each municipality's share would be calculated half based on valuation as and half based on population as determined by the census. Make sense? Everybody follow? So here's the revenue under the current formula. This would be the revenue under the new formula. Anywhere where the red line's higher, the town below is getting more money. Red line's lower than the blue line, the town's losing money. Under the 50-50 proposal, each municipality's expense for county services, their county tax levy, would remain the same. We're not proposing to change the expense formula that Supervisor Simpson brought up. It's still going to be based on valuation. The revenue, however, would shift out of 7 municipalities and into 6 municipalities as follows. Bolton loses $1.5 million. Chester loses $195,000. Glens Falls gains $1.3 million. Hague loses $564,000. Horicon loses $492,000. Johnsburg just about breaks even, but loses $38,000. Again, these are all 2017. If we had this formula in place, how would the towns have done compared to how they actually did? Lake George within the town, down 103. Within the village. Lake George outside the village loses $597,000. Lake Luzerne picks up $233,000. Queensbury picks up $1.4 million, almost $1.5 million. Stony Creek, just about break even. They pick up $4,200. Congratulations, Frank.
Yeah. Let's see.
Thurman picks up $59,000. Warrensburg picks up $452,000. Yes.
So under this scenario, the village, you said, is going to lose $103,000 per year?
Within the village, within the village limits. That would be the difference.
I saw the article this past week about the sewer system that they
Okay. Under the 50-50 proposal, the net cost of county government, again, the tax liability minus the revenue received back, would change as follows. I didn't put labels on these. You can see it goes up in Bolton. Red is the new formula. Blue is the current formula. Goes up in Chester. Goes down in Glens Falls. Now, how can it be a negative? It's because Glens Falls, under this formula, essentially the sales tax revenue that would come back covers the county expense liability and then provides additional revenue to pay down the city tax, which is very high. Hague, cost goes up. Horican, cost goes up. Johnsburg, up a little bit. That's the village. Lake George outside the village. Lake Luzerne goes down. Queensbury goes down. Stony Creek, Thurman, and Warrensburg. It's hard to see that red column, but
How much
you
is
can
that
see it
red
if I
column?
do this. The red, I'd have to, I think it's on a future slide. Okay. Each municipality's percentage share of the net cost of county government changes as follows. So Bolton right now, you already saw the pie chart, ends up paying 16.5%. Bolton would now pay 27%. Chester goes from 7 to almost 9. Glens Falls, again, it looks weird because it's negative, but the amounts above the graph are going to add up to 107%, and then the negative 7%, it balances out to the 100. Hague goes up from 6 to 10. Horican from 6 to 10. Johnsburg, 4.5, up slightly. There's Lake George Village. Lake George outside from 9 to 13.5. Lake Luzerne from about 4 to 2. Queensbury, 35% of the bill they're currently paying. As you remember, that large chunk of the pie, they changed to 25.2%. Stony Creek, 1.3 to 1.3. Thurman loses about 0.5%, and Warrensburg goes from 3.3 down to 0.15%. Per capita, I won't spend too much time on these. It'll follow the same pattern as the prior slide. If at any point somebody wants me to slow down, just give a shout. I think that may be the number. That's not the whole dollar number, but that's the per capita dollar number, 529. New per capita sales tax distribution. So under the 50-50 proposal, towns would still get back varying amounts of sales tax revenue, but the gap would narrow. So this is way back to the beginning of the presentation. I cited that one of the most common complaints against the current distribution is the disparity between the per capita revenue that each municipality gets back. There it is. Hague is getting almost 2,100. Warrensburg is the lowest at 203. Under the new formula, you still have a disparity, but it narrows. Hague is still the highest, 1,300. Warrensburg goes up to 300. Preliminary conclusions. Currently, the liability that taxpayers in each municipality owe for county services is based only on that municipality's valuation, and the amount that the municipality gets back from the county in sales tax revenue is also based on valuation. Under the 50-50 proposal, the expense liability stays the same because it's based still on valuation, but the amount that the municipality gets back will go up for some and down for others because you've added the population component. Generally speaking, high-value towns with smaller populations are hurt. Their expense liability doesn't change, but their revenue from the county decreases. Likewise, generally speaking, higher population towns benefit. Their expense liability doesn't change, but their revenue increases. Historical perspective. This, yes, sir.
Could you go back to that? Generally speaking, high-value towns with smaller populations are hurt. That would include like the expense liability to the county is not changing, but the revenue from the county decreases. That's the problem right there. That's it in a nutshell. If you want my money, take my bill. You can't take my money and leave all the bills with me. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. I can't believe anybody even thought of it.
They got to jump on the governor's marijuana law.
Here's a historical perspective. Earlier on, I put up the 3 graphs showing Bolton and Horicon over time picking up more of the revenue, and Queensbury, ebbed and flowed, but overall lost revenue. It expresses a share, a proportional share of the overall revenue distributed. Here's the expense side. So Bolton, in addition to picking up revenue, also picked up expenses. Back in 1970, about somewhere between 5 and 10% of the expenses were Bolton's, and now present day up above 15%. Here's Chester, has increased. Glens Falls has gone down from between 25 and 30% liability for county programs down to just under 10. And again, the downslope, you'll see 2002, right after 2000, the curve sort of drops off at a higher rate. That's because of the special distribution. Hague, I'll do this purple line down below. They start to bunch up at the bottom, but Hague has increased. There's Horicon, hard to see, about the same pattern as Hague. Johnsburg, Lake George, Lake Luzerne in the red. Queensbury up here almost looks identical to the sales tax revenue chart that was up earlier in the presentation. Way down at the bottom in the purple line is Stony Creek. Thurman is just about over the top of Stony Creek, blue. And Warrensburg is really hard to see, but you can see it there, the orange line. Here's the percentages. Bolton in 1970 paid for 7.5% of county programs. 2019, they're up to 15.4. Give you a chance to digest this. Queensbury has ebbed and flowed. Move on unless objection. So the chart below compares what each municipality's 2019 county tax levy is right now to what it would have been under this 1970 valuations. So again, even though some towns have benefited by picking up a larger percentage of the sales tax revenue, they've also picked up expense. And the towns that have lost percentages of the revenue have lost expense. Bolton, if they had the same obligation for county expenses now as they did in 1970, that would be the current county tax levy on Bolton residents. That's the actual current tax levy. Chester pays more than they would have paid at the 1970 valuation. Glens Falls has gone down. If you remember the chart, I think the previous two slides ago showed between 20 and 25% of the expense obligation, and now down below 10%. So
Each interval is measured in 2 million?
2 million.
2 million.
Yeah. So about $8 million. Hague has gone up. Horicon has gone up. Johnsburg, about the same. Lake George, Lake Luzerne, gone up. Queensbury's gone up slightly, a little under 14 to over 15. Stony Creek, about the same. Thurman and Warrensburg's gone down slightly. Again, this represents, if you will, savings over time as a result of the valuation changes and how it applies to the expense.
I want to echo something that you said before, though, that the tax liability was premised on the idea that the municipalities with the greater ability to pay were shouldering more of the burden.
Mhm.
And so as this is changing, you can
That's
see
right.
that those municipalities who have less liability now are less able to pay.
That's right.
And
That's-
it's the growth in those communities that is lowering the expense in the other communities, right? It's the growth, the valuation.
Yes, the growth. So when you're proportionally valued more than you used to be, you're picking up a larger percentage of $25 million in revenue, but you're at the same time picking up a larger percentage of $50 million rough justice in expenses. $46 million if we want to use a 17 levy.
So conversely, you could say if our property values were impacted and went lower, it's going to shift that cost onto other towns.
That's right.
Throughout
yeah,
the county.
That's right. And to Claudia's point, you know, the delta, the expense is always going to be larger than the sales tax revenue unless sales tax does really, really well, which would be great, Mike, right? But that net is always going to, it'll impact a town that's on the rise more than it will impact a town that is, you know, not as rapidly on the rise, if that makes any sense. And again, that's the means test that's built into these formulas, which I think gets to Supervisor Bramer's point. That's why the county tax levy is determined according to property value. That expense is supposed to go to the municipalities that have the most wealth and are better able to pay it.
Net of revenue.
The net of revenue.
Net of revenue.
Yeah.
Let's be clear on that. Go back to the first slide in terms of how we calculate. That liability falls net of revenue. Otherwise, you could tax Bolton on $157 million, which is the county budget. It's always net of revenue.
Okay, so what about the municipal property tax burden? As I said, you got to consider all three. It's the county expense liability, the revenue you get back from the county, as well as what the municipality is charging to balance the municipal budget. That tells you the impact on taxpayers. So as I said, tax law allows municipalities to take it in against the municipal budget. Everybody here does it.
Could we look at that just one second? And maybe it's not an answer we need to have right now, but the way you read it in the very beginning, it sounded like they were only to do that if there was leftover money after applying
That's right.
a reduction in their county levy.
Right. That would be the default position.
But we're not doing that. Our municipalities are not doing that.
Correct.
No.
Over in the beginning,
They did.
all of the municipalities did apply the full sales tax distribution against their county tax levy to protect their taxpayers from the Medicaid cost. In the beginning, that's how it all was. Over the years, each municipality has gradually shifted to take it to, instead of counting it against the county tax liability, to take it into the municipal budget in order to reduce the municipal tax levy. So these numbers here, 2018 levies. This was the town levy in every town in 2018, and the county levy. And I want to point out, for instance, with Bolton, $650,000 was left with the county in order to lower the county property tax burden. That's built into this calculation. So if Bolton hadn't done that, that 809 would be $650,000 less. Likewise, if I find my notes here, in Queensbury took in $9 million thereabouts in sales tax revenue. That $9 million is reflected in the Queensbury municipal levy of $1.9 million. If Queensbury had decided to apply it against the county levy would have been $9 million lower, and the municipal levy would have been $9.9 million. Warrensburg, another example, $800,000 of sales tax revenue. It's applied against the municipal levy. Municipal levy would have been $2 million, and the county levy would have been $800,000 lower. Just again, to illustrate the point, not only that the revenue side is calculated in this slide, which is going to influence the following slides, but also just to show you it doesn't really matter where you apply that revenue. At the end of the day, your residents are still paying the same amount of money. It's just a question of who it's going to, county or the town. So the chart below is the previous slide, 2018 municipal levy plus 2018 county levy, and I'm going to show it per capita, and then I'm going to show it differently afterwards. So there's Bolton, 2,900, Chester, 1,200, Glens Falls, 939. Again, because you got more people to split it up. Hague, 2,900, Horicon, 2,200, Johnsburg, 1,200, Lake George, 2,200, Lake Luzerne, 868, Queensbury, 587, 1,548, Thurman, 1,000, Warrensburg, 625. Now this chart shows how those per capitas would change under the 50-50. I'll shoot through these quickly. It's the same pattern that you've already seen, where the towns that have the lower populations tend to increase, and the towns that have the higher populations tend to decrease.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
When you're talking about per capita, I should have asked this earlier, but is this per person or per taxpayer?
It's using the census figure that the 50-50 formula uses.
Mm.
Okay, now let's talk about it in terms of rate, which is not, yes?
Just a quick follow-up. And that does not include any seasonal residents, is that correct? That population?
No, that's permanent residents as recorded in the U.S. Census 2010. So this chart displays the total tax burden as an approximated tax rate. Now the formula I've used is the 2018 municipal levy plus the 2018 county levy, and then I divided it by the equalized full value in order to get an apples to apples. As you know, not all towns are full value. If you use the tax rates that are based on the assessed value, you're not looking apples to apples. That's why I do the division based on the equalized full value. Here's what happens. Bolton ends up, again, this is not an exact science. It's a way of me showing what the proportions are. Bolton, Chester, Glens Falls is up 1,375. Hague, Horicon, Johnsburg, Lake George, Lake Luzerne, Queensbury, Stony Creek, Thurman, and Warrensburg. City like Glens Falls Police Department has certain expenses that other communities don't have. Yeah, exactly. Which is why cities have the ability to preempt. It's in recognition of the fact that they have more obligations. They tend to have more obligations than smaller municipalities do. So the chart below displays how tax rate approximations in the previous slide would change under 50-50. Bolton's would go up. Again, same patterns. Glens Falls goes down, 1245. So the gap, if you will, in the blue columns is narrowed in the red columns. Any questions on this?
Yeah, you can stop right there.
Okay. Now, supervisors I've talked to have offered this as a comparison tool, which I think is useful. So let's take property that's valued in Glens Falls at $150,000 as a benchmark. That property owner is going to pay $2,062 in combined county city taxes under the rate approximation that I had in the previous slide. Okay? Under the lower rate approximation with the 50/50, that $150,000 property owner goes to $1,867. So the question is, what valuation would a property in another municipality have if the owner of that property was paying the same as this Glens Falls property owner, $2,062 under the current rate and the same $1,867 under the adjusted rate? Here's the answer. So there's the current. That $150,000 Glens Falls property, the amount that that property owner is paying, a property owner with property valued at $505 in Bolton is paying the same amount of money. That's what this chart is meant to show, not to pick on Bolton. Queensbury, that property owner, their property is valued at $455, paying the same dollar amount as the Glens Falls property valued at $150. And here's the differences under the 50/50 plan. So the $150,000 stays the same in Glens Falls because that's our benchmark. And now under the 50/50 plan, a Bolton taxpayer paying the same amount of money as that Glens Falls taxpayer, their home's going to be worth $373 instead of the $505. So again, it narrows the discrepancies between the columns. The question then becomes, which one of those scenarios is more fair? If you picked up that $150,000 Glens Falls property and you put it down in Bolton, again, sorry to pick on Bolton, what would that property be worth? The current rate approximation would suggest that the $150,000 Glens Falls owner pays the same dollar amount as the $505,000 Bolton owner, as I've said, and there's the difference under the 50/50 plan. So the question has to be, which scenario is more apples to apples? Is the 150 comparable to 505, or is it comparable to 373? It's a complex analysis. I've explored this question with multiple supervisors as well as interested citizens. Everybody agrees it's difficult to pin this down precisely. It's just a tough thing to do. But we do have the ability to run class codes for residential parcels and come up with the average assessed value and the average full market value of a residential parcel in each town. This even is not an exact science, but it's a start. And if there are other methodologies that make more sense, we should look at those as well. But out of all the conversations I've had, this was the one that, to me, started to approximate this in a way that made sense. So here's the analysis for 2018. There's the number of residential parcels that have homes for each municipality. The next column shows their assessed value. The column after that shows their full market value. And then we'll just do an average. Average assessed value for each residential parcel, average full market value. So if you're looking at average assessed value, which I don't like as much, you look down at Stony Creek and you look at Johnsburg, that shows you the impact of the non-100% towns, that it can throw the numbers off. But that, if you're using average assessed value as a comparison, the $106,000 Glens Falls property compares to the 530. And again, we're using averages here. It's not exact science. If you use full market value, $137,000 in Glens Falls compares to $582 in Bolton. Yes?
Mr. Moore, I'd just like to point out something that's really important. In Horicon, it says there's 1,671 residential parcels with homes. According to the 2010 census that we're using to base this fairness question on, I only have 1,389 residents.
Mm-hmm.
I can assure you, there's no empty homes in
Yeah.
Oregon. There's a lot of people there, and I don't.
And that gets to the gentleman's point behind me that using the census number is not necessarily a good measure to use because we have a large seasonal population here.
There's real people there.
Yeah. The chart below is the data from the previous slide. So again, here's that current discrepancy, the 150,000 in Glens Falls as compared to the 505 in Bolton. Here's the comparison when you look at it, assessed value, average assessed values. And here's the comparison when you look at the full market values. So
You should say something to the residents. I think that's what people do, is take them to this part of the county level. I think you should make it, but this is what we should say.
Yeah.
The part.
yeah, this is apart from the county levy. This is, again, it's based on the county expense liability plus the expense liability to the town or to the city or to the village.
It's not, just in case you're in the audience, municipal budgets are not part of the county levy. Neither are special districts, sewer, water, lighting districts, or perhaps not part of the county levy. This is being offered for analysis purposes.
Yeah. Now, if we were able to agree on an exact science to compare property across municipal boundaries, there would still be a disagreement on what's fair and what's not fair. And I've had this conversation with many people who feel differently about the issue. Some will point to the capital gain that's realized by the Lake Town resident whose property appreciates more quickly than a similar property would in a lower value town. So that Lake Town resident ends up with having a more valuable property that they could turn around and sell. Others, especially Lake Town residents who've owned their properties for many years, that we've all heard from, will argue that there's another side to that coin, and that's when their valuation rapidly appreciates, so does the increase in their tax bill each year. The increase in the county tax bill is going to go up at a higher rate than it would in a town that's not growing as quickly. Their incomes don't necessarily keep up, and continued ownership for many of these people could become increasingly unaffordable and lead them to a situation where they do look seriously at selling the property. Now, that is where I intended to end up, but for the past couple of days there have been, as I mentioned earlier, a few other suggestions thrown out by supervisors. I won't say which supervisors, but I'll say whether they're from a high-value town or a low-value town. So these are the other proposed formulas. And let me also say, I hope that to some extent everybody in this room is disappointed with at least one of the slides that you saw, because it's my intention to show you a diversity of opinion on a very complex issue, and that there are different ways to look at this issue. But here are the other proposed formulas. What if the 50-50 proposal was amended to also determine expense liability according to the 50-50 formula? And the table below is going to assume that Glens Falls keeps their special distribution. So, as you can see, the sales tax hit in Bolton is still $1.5 million. All the sales tax changes are the same as they were in the previous analysis. Queensbury picks up, well, I guess, what was it, $1.4 million? Those changes are going to be the same. But what changes is the property tax column, the very first column and the third column. So at the end of the day, these are the towns that are hurt. These are the towns that are helped in the final column. The ones that would be hurt under this formula, Glens Falls would lose $1.5 million. Lake Luzerne would lose $94,000, $95,000. Queensbury would lose $511,000. Thurman would lose $19,000, and Warrensburg would lose $216,000. Second proposal, this comes from a supervisor, of course, from a higher value town. Second proposal, what if the sales tax distribution and the expense liability were both determined 100% on population? And again, let's assume Glens Falls keeps their special distribution. Now you look at that final column, you got Bolton benefiting $1.8 million, Glens Falls is losing $2.5 million, Lake Luzerne's losing $210,000, Queensbury is losing $1.2 million, Thurman is losing $47,000, Warrensburg is losing $450. So again, if you go from currently, we're doing both expense and revenue on valuation. This is expense and revenue purely on population.
But, Mayor, so can you go back?
Yes.
But what's interesting about that is that, in a way, the green columns or the red columns are a reflection of the benefit to those municipalities by sharing on an assessed value basis. In other words, if people were paying based on their actual experience, that's what would happen in the red. So what it's showing is that the municipalities in green are contributing more than what their population would dictate in terms of expense. You kind of follow what I'm saying?
If you could say that county expenses were determined, on a population proportion, perhaps some of them could be, others wouldn't be. Medicaid, for instance, your Medicaid recipients are going to concentrate in certain communities.
Well, right, but then the bias, but basically, this is doing a one-for-one, whereas if you weighted it, like what you're saying, the green numbers would be even higher, and the red numbers, the cost to the red numbers would be even greater. In other words, that when you see those small towns that are in the green, that's a one-for-one exchange on population. But if the county programs are benefiting the red numbers greater than they are the green numbers, then it would be weighted that way. So in fact, this is a more conservative analysis. You see what I'm saying? In other words, this is an interesting tool because what it shows is that if expense were divided on a per capita basis, the numbers swing dramatically. Dramatically.
And the other point I would make about this is it wouldn't happen. The state is always going to divide the cost of county government according to valuation. I can't think of a single example of deviation from that. Perhaps Treasurer Swan? No. No, all 57 are doing purely valuation.
But there are programs that can be divided on a per capita, on a user-based system.
There are programs there are 3 programs, to my knowledge. You can bill out safety net to the municipality that it originates in. To the extent that you have kids in your municipalities that are attending out of county community colleges, the county has the ability to bill that back to the municipalities. And election costs. Currently, some of that is billed back to municipalities. The county would have the ability to bill back more. There may be more. Those are the 3 that I know offhand. Now, this proposal came from a supervisor from a lower value town. And it sort of takes what we do with the occupancy tax and applies a similar principle to the sales tax revenue. So what if up front each municipality gets $200,000 of the sales tax revenue, and then the remainder is distributed according to valuation? Here it is in the table below, and again, Glens Falls keeps the special distribution. So as you see, Glens Falls is held harmless. What they got in 2017, the 3.6, they would still get 3.6, and there's no change. First column is it totals out to $9.8 billion. That's the countywide valuation minus Glens Falls. The second column is each municipality's percentage of that countywide valuation. Everybody gets $200,000 right off the rip, and then what's left over of the tax distribution is then parceled out according to those percentage values in column in the percent EFV column, equalized full value.
So there are 3 municipalities in the red. I can't read it.
Yeah.
Bolton, Lake George, outside, and
Right.
Queensbury.
So under this scenario, Bolton would lose $206,000, Lake George would lose $28,000, Queensbury would lose $673,000, and the other municipalities, Glens Falls, assuming that Glens Falls doesn't participate in it, that they just keep doing what they're doing.
All others gain.
All others gain, yeah. Here's the same formula if Glens Falls does participate. So you can see Glens Falls would never participate. That illustrates the $500,000 benefit that I outlined earlier that Glens Falls gets from preemption. I'm assuming that Glens Falls keeps a special distribution, but they're going to lose $550,000 because they're no longer preempting, and the entire revenue base is going to get distributed out according to valuation. So Bolton ends up losing less money, 113. Glens Falls takes quite a hit. Queensbury loses less, 473. All the other towns benefit. And then one other formula that was proposed by the same supervisor from a lower value town. The idea has been floated, what if we keep the current sales tax distribution formula the same, but we set a cap on each municipality's revenue? So for instance, whatever a municipality got in 2018, or if you want to have a growth factor that's indexed for inflation, but that's the most that going forward that municipality is able to keep. Once that municipality reaches their cap, that revenue, instead of going to the municipality, would then go into a segregated revenue pool. And at the end of the year, that segregated revenue pool would then be distributed to the low-value towns according to a formula that would be determined by this board. And I did not put numbers to this. It's difficult to do that analysis because there's so many unknowns in the equation. We don't know what the cap formula would be, what would determine a low-value town, how many towns are we talking here, and what would be the distribution formula. So this is probably everybody's favorite slide, end of presentation.
Brian, that was an excellent presentation. At this stage, what I'd like to do is, because we have so many guests here, that I know some of you may wish to want to address the board, and I do want to offer the privilege of the floor, but I would ask if you could please, this isn't a public hearing, it's a privilege of the floor. If you wish to address the board, if you could try to keep your remarks to a couple of minutes, it would be much appreciated. But with that, what I'd like to do is open it up to the visitors. Is there anyone here wishing to address the Board of Supervisors? Yes, sir.
I'm concerned because you're admonished not to build a building on sand. You also don't build an argument on sand. And I'm listening to the entire presentation. Of course, we talk about assessed valuation, which is a relatively solid figure to look at. But when we referred to population, we referred to year-round population. And I believe we'll find that those towns which received a decrease, would receive a decrease under this new proposal, have summer populations that vary greatly. And so the very term population is based upon sand. It's much like ocean sand. We're basing our entire presentation on the population, which varies so greatly. And I think that that means that the arguments that have been based upon that are not very good. A few minutes ago, I came away with the conclusion that it was snowing outside, too.
If you could, sir, just for the record, could you just state your name?
Roger Bombardier, Town of Horicon.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to address the board at this time? Yes, ma'am. Deanne?
Good afternoon. I've been seated at those tables for some time myself, and I've spent 39 years as an assessor in Warren County, so I've worn all the hats possible, but I am a taxpayer, and I am an interested citizen. I'm Deanne Ream, and I do live in Boat Landing. I had a lot of things I was going to say, and Mr. Moore did a wonderful job of putting this together so you could see all kinds of scenarios. But I will remind you of a couple of things. New York State levies sales tax, and they do not distribute it per capita. They put it into a pot, and it is revenue to fund state services. And that, as he pointed out, was the initial intent in Warren County. And initially, that sales tax almost equaled whatever the levy was. So the county was going to spend $4 million, and the share that was going to reduce the town's levy for their share of the county tax was also $4 million. That's in the 70s. In the 80s, actually, sales tax exceeded what the county budget was, levy-wise. The levy in the mid-80s was somewhere around $6 million, and the 50% that would have been town share was almost $10 million. So towns got that extra money in their pocket at the end of every year, even though they were paying their county tax in full. But by the 90s, things had turned around. Mid-90s, and that's when all of the towns opted to take the distribution home and use it to defray their town tax, was because by then, the levy at the county level was more than the sales tax revenue to offset it. So for instance, in 1977, you had a levy at the county level of about $4 million, and you had sales tax to offset it about $4 million. 2017, you have a levy at the county level of $42 million, and the share of that county revenue that's sales tax was a mere $24 million. Levies went sky high. Sales tax did not keep track at the same pace. But I'm just going to briefly talk about this population distribution and whether or not that's somewhat flawed. And I think a lot of you came to thinking population would be a good way to distribute sales tax because that is how you distribute occupancy tax. It is a location-based tax. You occupy a room, you generate occupancy tax, and it goes back to the municipality where the room was rented. Sales tax does not directly correlate to population. There's a whole bunch of demographics that go into how much an individual or a household might spend that would be taxable as a sales tax. We know groceries are not. Things that are high-ticket items like cars, boats, construction supplies, those correlate to disposable income, extra things. So a municipality where the household income might be $30,000 or $40,000 will not generate the same sales tax to the county as a household that might have $60,000 or $80,000 of household income. Just not going to happen. So I think if in fact you decide population is a factor, you want to do some demographic examinations to make sure that a 2,000 resident community or a 3,000 resident community, that there is actually going to be apt to be 50% more sales tax produced from those 3,000 as opposed to 2,000 residents. And lastly, all of you who are town supervisors, county supervisors, this might not sink in as much, but if you're a town supervisor and you get more distribution to reduce your town tax, which is what the graph showed, you will not give that out at the front of the town hall to your residents. You will reduce your town tax. It will be revenue to offset your town tax. That reduction in town tax is going to be based on value of the property. So the homeowner with the $100,000 house will get maybe 20% of the savings of a homeowner with a $500,000 house. Simple dimple. Two things that I want to leave you with. County tax, if you have a house anywhere in Warren County and it's worth $100,000, the tax bill is the same. That's what all this equalization discussion does. So at the county level, same valued property pays the same into the county coffers. At the town level, which we're mixing in here, and it is different. At the town level, it is the value of the town to support town services. So a higher valued town, cost per thousand is less than a lower valued town. And if you look, and if you're out here chatting with people about their school tax, for instance, you will find school tax. In some municipalities, perhaps Queensbury, per thousand is much higher than in a Bolton or a Lake George school district. The state, nor the county, nor anybody else tries to mess with that. It is simply a function, how much revenue you need and what is the value of the community. That's the way it is done in New York State. It's an ad valorem tax, and I believe it should be an ad valorem revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. Anyone else wishing to address the... Yes, sir.
I'll keep this really short.
Okay. Thank you.
My name is Bill McGee. I live up in the Adirondack, town of Horicon. I'm one of the people, if the 50-50 thing goes through, I may have to move. I inherited my property. It's on a lake. I pay a lot of taxes, and I understand that, and I accept my responsibility for being there. But I just would like somebody to explain to Supervisor Simpson how he's going to manage the town losing almost $500,000. Will he still be able to keep the town garage open and take care of the roads? What about our library and our commitment to taking care of our waters? We take a lot of care of Schroon Lake and Brant Lake, put a lot of money into it. We get a lot of support from our town, and I really appreciate that, Mr. Simpson. But my question is, how are we going to manage our town if we lose almost $500,000? Anybody has an idea, talk to that man. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk, and I hope you'll consider those points.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Joan Caruso, and I'm a seasonal resident, and I pay a lot of taxes. I believe I should count. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Rich Norott. I live in the town of Horicon. My wife Joanne and I are year-round residents. We live on East Shore Drive, on the east side of Schroon Lake. My talk won't take as long as your talk, so don't worry. But basically, I'm kind of opposed to this new shift in the way we're going to redistribute or distribute sales tax, mainly because of the population issue. And I'm going to pretty much say what other people said. We get a ton of people coming in that are seasonal. I'm permanent, and I'm probably one of 5 on our road that is permanent. The rest are seasonal. Those folks pay just as much taxes as those permanent residents, and they should be included in your population count if you're going to go to this type of valuation. There's no reason not to include them. They are residents, maybe 6 months a year, but nonetheless, they are still residents. They're not in the census because they're not permanent residents as far as having this as a permanent home. The other thing I wanted to say is there's been some mention about how much sales tax revenue is generated by municipalities. I got to tell you, us folks in Horicon or Hague or anywhere else up north do all our shopping down here in Queensbury. We buy all our supplies down here, all our groceries, our liquor, and other things. So a lot of our sales tax payments are generated by us here in the town of Queensbury. And now that we have a price chopper in Warrensburg, also in Warrensburg. So it's not limited to just Queensbury residents or Warrensburg residents. It's summer residents, visitors. They spend a lot of money in Queensbury and Warrensburg, and it all generates sales tax revenue. So these are a few things that should be considered in a reformulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Kathy?
Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Kathy Munsell, Fort William Henry in Lake George. And I'm not sure, Ryan, that I saw the business perspective in terms of costs. I know you talked about residential housing and things of that nature. Has that any calculation been identified relative to businesses, or it's within the overall value?
The overall numbers, when you talk about the overall tax levies, certainly include what businesses are paying, but when we broke it out later on to try to get an apples-to-apples comparison, we look just at residential houses because to the extent that I've heard from public and members of the supervisors, they've been focused more on residential. We could certainly take a look at the business side, though.
Certainly as a business owner in Lake George, I would certainly appreciate that. Your presentation was phenomenal and answered many of my questions. I think what I would say as a business person in Lake George, I would ask to go cautiously in terms of creating any theory of instability in terms of taxation for businesses. And I say that because, as you know, there are many things that are happening, whether it's wage increases and insurance increases and sewer tax increases and lighting district. And the businesses, it just becomes harder and harder every year in terms of reallocation or increases in taxes. So I would cautiously approach this so that businesses and or communities, as noted before, could literally have time to plan for these things. And as just a final statement within it, I think that within the municipalities, it would, I don't know if anyone's ever done the services that are provided to the residents for those tax burdens that they have relative to the municipalities. Because I know that there are things that we have a business in the town, we have a business in the village, and it's very different in terms of what you get for your services, because certainly towns can make a choice what services they provide to their residents. And it would be interesting to see in those different comparisons what services are provided. Thank you very much.
We'll try to get the presentation online. We can put this on.
Sure.
We'll put this presentation online, Kathy, and the slide that showed the effective increase in the tax rate, how it would affect the tax rate, that differential, that would apply in every municipality on as an increase in a rate per thousand, as a general rule. That doesn't mean that the municipal budget can't be adjusted. It's just saying all other things being equal. Anyone else wishing to address? Yes, sir. Steve?
Steve Vermont, Town of Hague. I just have a question about the redistribution. It seems to be the high population towns. I haven't heard if they've had a decrease in services for their people, and the people are demanding more services. And I don't understand the whole realm of the thing. I agree with the folks over here from the small towns up by us that pay a lot of taxes. The summer people should be included. And if all this money goes away for us, how are we going to be able to answer to our people why our services have decreased? Just a thought. I don't understand why they need more and we need less. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
Thank you, Chairman Conover, and thank you, Ryan Moore. That was really comprehensive. And thank you for having a special meeting today to discuss the sales tax redistribution issue and the options. I thought I was coming here today to listen and learn, as I have for the past 15 months as the Executive Director of the Lake George Regional Chamber of Commerce and CVB. Yet then I got a call from a colleague to urge me to speak as a property owner in the town of Lake George. Then I got a call from a member to speak on behalf of our general membership at large. Both calls prompted me to do my own research to truly understand what is at stake for all property owners, residents, and visitors regarding how the sales tax dollars are distributed and spent. This is a big issue, and I know won't be decided today, obviously. So I'm here to urge you all to keep your county hat on, not your respective municipality hat. As representing the chamber, thus the county collective, please review the dollars from a stability perspective. With the current distribution based on assessment to completely change to distribute based on population, that's a major change that rocks every boat in the county. Whereas some form of middle ground may be the answer. I noticed that there are several counties that distribute based on percentages of assessed value as well as population. The Office of the Controller issued an update on local government sales taxes in 2015, which I think several of your pieces were right out of that report. which I'm sure you are much more well-versed on than I am, that demonstrated that there is no one perfect way to distribute the sales tax. As a property owner in the town of Lake George, one of the many areas that sees our population swell certain months of the year, yet not year-round, again, we don't want to see our taxes increase because our high season population is not part of the equation. Yet the operations to serve that population will still need to be paid for on an annual basis. So again, our message is one of stability. Is there an equation to distribute the sales tax dollars that keeps our community funding stable year-round to serve all businesses, residents, and visitors? That's the question to be answered. The business community is here to help you in whatever way that we can run those numbers, demonstrate our support, and still protect our investments for now and the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak at this time? Mr. White.
Hello, my name is Travis Whitehead. I'm from the town of Queensbury. I would like to note that this is the first of 8 people that you've heard that actually would come from a community that would benefit from the proposal that is before you, the 50-50 proposal. So you might hear some things a little different. First of all, I'd like to clarify a couple of points. It was a very good, and I know it's a very complex consideration here on just what to do. But there are a few things that were confusing to me when I listened to it. I'm sure they're confusing to others. The term expense liability came up many, many times. The expense liability of Glens Falls and Bolton and such. And it was pointed out how really the expense liability matches the distribution of the sales tax almost precisely. And it does match it precisely because it's based on the same thing, valuation, with one exception, and that's Glens Falls, who is preempted. So it was pointed out that everyone matches except that it seems like Glens Falls is getting more than they deserve. And it wasn't said that way, but you know, the numbers kind of indicated that. So what I'd like to point out is that when you talk about expense liability, and please disagree with me, Mr. Moore, if I'm saying anything wrong, that you're not going ahead and saying how much the town of Queensbury costs or how much the town of Bolton costs or the city of Glens Falls costs. To get that number would be extremely difficult to figure out, you know, how many roads are in each community, all the different expenses that might be very different from place to place. And so we were just talking about valuation to valuation, and naturally it came out 1-to-1 with that small exception because of the preemption. What I'd like to point out is that a lot of the smaller communities, for instance, have a lot of bridges and county roads there where, you know, there are no bridges in the largest community of Queensbury. There aren't even no roads. There are no county roads in the city of Glens Falls. So, I mean, there are expenses that are different. It is too difficult to calculate it out. But I'm just pointing out that it's not very good to go ahead and say that on an expense basis, and when you're talking about an expense basis, you're not truly talking about expenses the way I would think about it. The other point I'd like to clarify is that while I'm the first of 9 people here to represent a community that would benefit from this, I know that we've gone through the numbers before, and the fact of the matter is that 80% of the residents in the county would benefit from that proposal. 20% would be paying more. Is that true?
That's about true, yes.
It is. And now, there is no shift in dollars, so that actually what that means is the 80% are probably going to be getting lesser per person than the 20% are going to be losing. But the point is that, you know, we've heard an awful lot that, you know, there are people that have some houses that are assessed at very high values. They're worth a lot of money, and they feel that they pay a lot of taxes, and I'm sure they do. But at the same time, you put up that slide there that showed the tax burden on a person in Glens Falls with a $150,000 house would be roughly the same as a person in Bolton with a $550,000 house. And the problem there, and the reason that works out that way, of course, is that the town tax rate is so much lower for Bolton and Hague and Horicon than it is in a place like Queensbury, Glens Falls, etc. So when you look at these tax rates, and you had them up there, sometimes we've talked about school taxes, and I would agree that gets off the subject. But if we just look at the burden that could be controlled by this board, that would be county taxes and the town taxes. And when you look at that, the money that is distributed from sales tax, which is on valuation, which is, you know, more than 150,000 versus 500,000. The $500,000 home is going to get 3 times the sales tax benefit that the person that paid the same number of dollars out of his pocket on the $150,000 home got. What that does is it lowers the tax rate in those towns. In fact, the tax rate in the town of Hague is nil. The tax rate in Bolton is very low, pennies on the per thousand. And in fact, those towns have had to take money out of that distribution and put it back towards paying off the county, or else those rates would actually go negative. So, you know, there is a problem here. I'm going to wrap this up because there's an awful lot of, again, difficult math to go through there. But if you just take the actual bills that somebody pays, that would be what I think is the best statement of what's going on here. So I took actual bills off of the websites. This is all public information. You can get it on anybody's house. I found a home in Glens Falls where the homeowner is paying $1,855 on a $129,000 home. This is all based on full valuation. This is county tax plus city tax, no sewer, no water, no school, no, you know, none of those lighting assessments. So it says apples to apples. In Warrensburg, I found a home at $192,000, so somewhat more, paying somewhat less, $1,639. And then in Bolton, another home, we're paying less yet at $1,566 on a valuation of $359,000. So what you see here is the person in Glens Falls, who happens to be former Supervisor Brock, pays more than the Warrensburg homeowner, who happens to be Supervisor Garrity, or the Bolton supervisor, and yet the assessed values of those homes are $129,000, $192,000, and $359,000. So based on that, the sales tax is going to be distributed based on those numbers to those people. So, you know, Mr. Conover will get double, more than double what Mr. Brock would get, and yet he pays less taxes. So you really have to look at the taxes spent and the tax rates as well as the assessment, because what you pay is a rate times an assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, sir. Dave, just
Real quick.
You can go.
Real quick.
Yes, sir.
My name is Vito Munson. I'm from the town of Horicon. You're all probably thinking that the town of Horicon is well represented here. is the fact that Rich and Bill and myself are the only ones left. My point is, you're holding this meeting in the middle of winter when all the people around us are all gone. I don't feel very well represented. I feel like the sheep and the wolf are going to tell you what to have for supper. I don't know who's going to take care of us, but we're way outnumbered.
I'm sure there'll be more
Dave.
meetings, believe me. Dave?
David Kenny, live in Queensbury, have businesses in the town of Lake George, village of Lake George. Has anybody, I have to concur with Kathy here, have we looked how this is going to affect businesses? But bigger than that, if you come from Long Island, you come from different places, how is this going to affect 5 motels on it? I know a lot in Bolton has changed to homes for motels, and they lose sales tax when they have more homes. And how is this going to affect a lot of small motel owners along the road that say, let's close, give up that sales tax, and now they sell them as homes? Has anybody looked at that formula all of a sudden if we lose X number of hotels or properties on the lake that say, you know what, I can't afford taxes anymore, I'm going to sell it and redevelop their houses. The lost sales tax, the one thing I am against, would like not to see, is especially Lake George and other areas, become a bedroom community. Long Island taxes are so high because they got bedroom communities. You have no rate, they have no ways of bringing in taxes. So I really think we should look at how this could affect some of the business that may decide, guess what, at this place, every property that sells on a lake, I think, just about gets converted to homes because that's the best value. Best value for those properties are homes. Get rid of them and knock the motel down. Now we lost the sales tax. Now we lost the tourists. Now we lost taxes in the stores because they're second homeowners. And now we don't even get the population benefit. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else? Last chance. Okay, now let's, the board members themselves, given the hour, I'm sure we'll have other meetings going forward, but I think it's appropriate for any supervisor that's been sitting here that's been waiting to speak. Go ahead. Supervisor Wild.
Chairman, thank you so much, and I'll try to be brief as I can. It is a complicated issue, and Mr. Moore, thank you. You did warn me that my head was going to spin with all the numbers, and it is. But I think what's most important is my first impression that this is kind of like a Robin Hood scenario. We're going to take from the rich and give to the poor. And a couple of people in the public have mentioned it. We're not looking at the economic side of this. And Mr. Moore, I'm not sure if we can do it. I did mention it to you, but I'd like to see these numbers based on residences and businesses. Take a look at the difference about the impact on our taxpayers, not just per capita. And I'll yield the floor.
Very good, very good. Mr. Dickinson, Supervisor Dickinson.
I have a lot to say and not enough time to say it, but I will say that I am very opposed to this. I think it's going to be disruptive to the county. It's going to be disruptive to all the towns. Every one of us came into their particular town or ward. If they have a budget, they had a set budget, and you had to work within that budget. And the budget was related to the things that you offer to your people in that town. Lake George happens to be a business town. It's the golden goose in Warren County. There are a lot of things that we need that other towns don't need. And I think it's unfair for people to come after my money in Lake George. It's very difficult for me to balance my budget every year. I have a lot of demands for a lot of things. But I live within my budget. I don't do all the things I'd like to do. I don't give all the services that I'd love to give. But I work hard at it, and I certainly can't take a hit like I see on these charts here. There is no way that I could survive a hit like $100,000. It's not there. You're talking about shifting the tax burden to from the county to the people of Lake George. And I have to tell you, Lake George is a great business community, and we generate a lot of money, architects, sales tax, etc. But by and large, the people on the back streets are just everyday Joe. You drive around the back streets of the village, the back streets of the town, you're going to see it's not what you see when you drive along the lake. So there's a lot of demand on what we do in Lake George, and we need to balance the two. And I just think this is totally disruptive, and I think it's a very adverse move on people who want to take my money.
Supervisor Hogan.
As we move forward with this deliberation, I'd like the members of this body to stop referring to this as my money. It's a bigger problem than that. The bigger issue here that we're not discussing is the fact that there are needs in communities in Warren County that are not being met. So please stop looking like we're fighting over scraps, and let's start talking about what's really at the heart of this issue.
Supervisor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say there's a lot of pieces of this pie that we haven't even thought about. And just thinking about Horicon, the town that I represent, we don't have a lot of things that a lot of other towns do. It's a different way of life, and we like the way we live in the Adirondack Park. We have different rules than a good portion of the population in Warren County. Our town is decided by a state piece of legislation called the APA Act. We have tens of thousands of acres of state land within the town of Horicon that is open to the public that we don't get assessed value for it. We get what the state says is what their fair determination assessed value is, which I can assure you lakefront property in Horicon on Braille Lake is thousands of times more than what the state is giving us for the lakefront on Faro. So there's a lot of things that within Horicon are central to Horicon. They're only identifiable to Horicon. So to compare our communities is going to be something that will probably take us the rest of our life. I've lived in 5 of the communities in Warren County, and I've paid taxes in Queensbury and Glens Falls. And I never thought about trying to compare my town or what our town board can do with the dollars that they're bringing into their town compared to what another town is doing with their tax dollars. We don't have sidewalks. There's a lot of people in town working who like sidewalks. We would like a downtown. We would like to not have to drive to Glens Falls to pay 30 cents less a gallon for our gas. And we really enjoy going to Warrensburg with a Price Chopper, because that's like a Sunday afternoon treat right there.
Lake George.
Lake George, I'm sorry.
Lake George.
Well, at the same time, we do stop at, get gas in Cumberland Farms, and we might save 10 cents, or actually it's 20 cents less in Warrensburg. So there's a lot of things that we need to take in consideration. We don't have sewer, we don't have water, but we're getting to the point around the lakes that to protect the lakes that is protecting the assessed value that is benefiting the entire county, we've got to expend dollars, and we've got 1,389 people in Horicon, according to the 2010 census, paying 6% of the county share, the county expense. So I think there's a lot more variables, and I would agree with Travis that I think you need an economist to figure out what is involved, and I think that's probably why the state originally dictated valuation, because it's the fairest value. So, thank you.
Supervisor Merlino.
Well, those were all great speeches, and I'm one of the few that disagree with most of it. By continuing assessed valuation, we can't build any more land, we can't have any more water bodies in town and the county. And as this assessed valuation keeps going up on each town, and the taxes being divided by the assessed valuation, the lower towns are going to lose out more and more. And I'm saying this in 5 years from now, you're going to understand this. In my town, and I hate to pick on Bolton, because I love Bolton, I really do. Maybe not so much we argue, but my town board the other night, my road superintendent wants more money to pave roads. And I says, I put in as much as I could in the budget, what we could afford. He said, well, I'm talking to, I won't mention where, supervisor in one of the towns, they're putting $1,600,000 to pave roads. Because they got plenty of money from sales tax revenue. And all the people say, well, we don't want to pay more taxes, but people have to get the whole list and get it out. You got Bolton land that has 51-cent, 52-cent town tax.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they're paying on their property. In Lake Luzerne, we're paying $3. And if you really want to get into it, one of the business people here just mentioned it, and I've kind of kept my mouth shut about it. The business people have got to get together and find out what they're paying in each town. You take Sagamore, it's paying 51 cents for their property, and Fort William Henry is paying almost $2. That means they have to rent a room for $25 or $30 more a night to keep even. So all people like me are asking, let's look for something in the middle. I don't like that 50-50 totally either, but I think something to help the towns. Like, we can't afford any more new trucks, and we have the same bills as the bigger towns. Bolton, Hague, Thurman, not Thurman, Thurman too, all of them. We got to buy trucks for $300,000 each. We got to plow roads. We got to do things in our town. But we're struggling to keep up with the tax cap. When you look at, if you go back to 2003, all the numbers, I'd like to go back to 2003 because at least at 10.5% for Bolton, Lake Luzerne was 4.5, almost 5%. I'm happy with that. But years later, it's 16.4, and Lake Luzerne is down to 3.9. We're going down, not up. And that's all we're complaining about.
Right.
You know, try to get a fair share. I can't help it if I live in a town and I'm running a town that houses are only 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. We're paying our fair share, $3.94 on that value. In Bolton, they're not even paying the $3.94 because it's left $650,000 out of sales tax revenue back in the taxes, so they're down to 5-something. So everybody says, oh, I don't want to pay more taxes, but look at the numbers. Percentages and all this stuff don't work out. It's the numbers at the bottom of what people need to live on. And you don't want to bankrupt smaller towns in this county. It's a great county. We all live here, but we need to work together better. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else? Craig, how are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for pulling together this meeting, and County Administrator Moore, thank you for pulling together that excellent spreadsheet. It lays out at the basis of this is about assessed value, that all of this sales tax distribution is based on assessed value. That is the whole premise and where it all comes from. So to devise something else from that, I don't know how you can do that. The principle is on assessed value. In our towns, and Supervisor Simpson laid it out pretty well. In the town of Chester, there's 2,050 homes that's within this percentage here. If you get on to our, we have 1,300 households. Simple math would say that's about 1,050 would be seasonal of those residences then. Out of our total $744 million of assessed value in the town, that's built land and vacant land, that our lake communities, Moon Lake, Friends Lake, Schroon Lake, come to about $450 million altogether. So that leaves about $300 million that are effectively held by more resident population. So if there is any discussion on moving anything onto population, you really do need to include people that pay major burdens of taxes in our town.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anyone else feel the need to speak today?
I'd just like to say one thing.
Mr. Garrett.
I really liked the presentation. I have to study it. But listening to Matt talk about the drawbacks moving in the APA and this and that, I'd like to point out one thing to everybody in the room, and maybe you can lean on your town supervisors to help me out a little bit. One of the things I brought up in my presentation to the board about the sales tax distribution is I got $20 million worth of exempt properties in my town. And that $20 million worth of exempt properties, $9 million belongs to the state of New York and Warren County. So if you could lean on your colleagues for all the state and county facilities I have in Warrensburg, which I said at the meeting, I'm happy that everybody comes to work out of Warrensburg. And then the other exempt property is the Hudson Headwaters. And I'm very pleased because, you know, they built in my community, and that's almost $10 million building. It gets 50 to 60,000 people there a year in encounters. And they spend a lot of money in my community. But if you look at the amount of sales tax generated, I believe in my community, you know, it goes to the county, it's redistributed based on assessed value. I have no problem with that. I would like some more money. I'm just saying, lean on your supervisors to say, you know, you guys ought to help Warrensburg on those county DPW facilities. You ought to help Warrensburg on the fish factory. You ought to help them on countryside adult homes. Because we get nothing other than having people work there and people staying there for those facilities being in my town. In fact, the town of Warrensburg doesn't charge Warren County a drop for water. Every bit of water Warren County uses in our community, they get for free. You know why? Because the county, way back when, let us drill wells on the site up near the county home. To add on to that, also the fairgrounds. County fairgrounds is located in Warrensburg. It can never be sold because it's park property. At one time we tried to sell it. We couldn't do it unless you got 20 special legislation. So those are some of the things that hurt me as a town supervisor in Warrensburg, why I brought it up. And we all struggle with our budgets. I won't say we're any different. You know, I feel for the lakefront properties. Maybe you need to lean on your assessors to lower your assessment. I don't know, because that's what seems
They do.
That seems to be the biggest thing. If you're going to be based on assessed value, your assessed values are going up. But seriously, $20 million worth of exempt properties in my community with the lowest assessment hurts. So that's all I'm going to say about it.
Thank you.
But lean on your supervisors.
Supervisor Bramer.
Thanks. I just wanted to echo from what you were saying that the city is struggling as well. We have, I know Supervisor Driscoll is probably going to say this, the hospital is in his ward. Everyone in the county, everyone in the Tri-County area goes to the hospital, and that's a tax-exempt property. So it is a difficult situation, and this is county money. It's not my town's money. It's not my city's money. This is county money, and we need to keep looking at this, and we need to go forward cautiously. I hear the business community. I do think that we need to have another workshop on it, so I'm curious and interested to see what Chairman Conover's plan is for going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking for that rabbit right now in the hat, but I'll find it. I will. Supervisor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Supervisor Bramer, for cutting my comments in half. You sound a lot better than I do when you talk. Of concern to me, and I think it's relative to this discussion, the first of many, I understand, and I appreciate the comments from our guests, those that didn't comment, but I kind of get a sense of where you're coming from. I've read a lot of reports about residents of New York moving away, and that's a real big concern of mine. You know, we talk about some communities where a majority of the people, or a lot of the people, are seasonal residents. I come from just outside of Cape Cod, and 2 decades ago, a majority of the properties on the Cape were seasonal properties. People who own those who would possibly rent them out or stay there during the season. That's grown through gentrification and people buying up. Young families are moving into there. They're becoming part of the community. As I understand it, about 30% of the properties in Warren County are rental properties. A larger percentage in the city and parts of Queensbury. If we're going to attract young families, young individuals to move here, as well as encourage older folks like myself to stay here after we've retired and continue to contribute to the economy. The decisions that we make during this process is very important. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anyone else? Supervisor Stroud, I'll be to you, Mike, in a second.
Thank you.
Oh, just for the record, Queensbury has $408 million worth of tax-exempt property.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, I'll return to Supervisor Wild. Supervisor Wild.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. And two quick questions, one clarification and one a follow-up, possibly. Mr. Moore, I believe in your presentation said that we cannot do anything unless Glens Falls decides to opt out of the current situation. Is that true?
Not necessarily. If Glens Falls opted out, we would have to get the attorneys at Tax and Finance involved as to whether it would take state legislation to change our formula. Because when a city no longer preempts, which is the position that everybody started in, you can do anything under the sun. You can have the county keep all of the money. You can come up with a different distribution formula that incorporates population or whatever you want. And in a sort of beginning scenario like that, the state comptroller would approve a formula. The question I would think that becomes a legal question is we have, for instance, the special distribution to Glens Falls is written into the state law. If however we choose to deal with this ends up, impacting that, there may have to be a state law change. So if Glens Falls no longer preempts, that would be a question that we would have to address. If they continue to preempt, and we decide to change the distribution formula for the revenue raised outside the city, we absolutely would need state legislation because, again, it's a state law that states that the 50% raised outside of the city is to be distributed to the towns and the villages according to assessed value. We needed state law to enact the special distribution to Glens Falls as well. If we want to do something with if we want to codify into the tax distribution something that'll come out of just the county share, we would need state law to do that. If you wanted to do it year by year and do some sort of revenue sharing appropriation out of the county budget and make it a county expense, you wouldn't need a state law to do that. You would need a resolution. It would need to be passed every year by every Board of Supervisors.
All righty. Supervisor Simpson.
I was debating whether to keep it going, but there is one other option that, it's fair and it takes out the murkiness of what's created this problem. And that is using all of the Warren County sales tax, which originally was enacted to offset the cost of county government. Leave it at the county. The town tax rates will dollar for dollar rise. Your town tax rates would go back up. And the town boards would be solely responsible for those town tax rates to their residents. And the county budget would be clear as water instead of clear as mud, where we've, town of Horkin receives $1.6 million. It offsets my town tax. I'm perfectly happy. I can explain it to my residents that it's the county tax offsets their county, the sales tax offsets their county levy. And I'm totally comfortable being responsible for the decisions, along with my town board members, that we make as town board members on the town budget. And then we can discuss how the county could help areas that need help.
You're talking to a supervisor that leaps quite a bit against his county tax. I believe the most, 1 of 3. Supervisor Brammer.
Well, that was one of the thoughts for my question earlier to Mr. Moore was, why are the towns even applying their distribution to the town's budget instead of applying it all back to the county tax burden? I don't think it's a question, I'm not questioning how you run your town, Supervisor Simpson, but I do think that's a good question that we should look into. What would be the effect of no distribution of sales tax? Can we pull that together and look at that at a future meeting.
I think for all of us, I think that ship sailed a long time ago. I don't think that decision was made by anybody presently in this room, I don't believe. I believe that goes back to the 70s, 80s? 80s. So just point of reference, that's not something that...
I'm not saying that we can't go
No,
back.
no. I'm just saying that that's not
Right.
Mr. Simpson and whatever, that the decision that we have made. Anyone else feeling overpowering? Frank?
I agree with that concept. I think that's one responsible way to do this, and that way the county levy is gone from all the towns, and the towns in the city are responsible for their own actions, period.
Unless there's an overpowering need, Mr. Moore.
I can run those numbers very easily, and I will assume that Glens Falls continues to preempt under that scenario, and that we're only talking about a state law relating to the outside revenue.
Right. And Supervisor Beatty.
Yeah, so let me get this straight. So basically you're saying that $27 million that gets dispersed among the towns, excuse my voice because I'm not feeling all that great today, but the $27 million that would be dispersed currently, the sales tax money, would stay in the county coffers? Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And so this board, which bought a $20 million courthouse expansion, which could have done it for $5 million, we're going to give them $27 million more to play with. I'm not comfortable with that.
No. I think what Supervisor Simpson is saying is that the credit would go against each municipality's county tax as opposed to taking it into their town budget and crediting it against their town tax.
Yes,
As
exactly.
Mr. Moore's slide showed, for the taxpayer perspective, it's the same dollar. But there is an argument to be made, I suppose, on transparency in terms of that issue. About your Supervisor Simpson.
I just want to clarify that. If we collect if there's $27 million of tax dollars that are going out to the towns, and we changed it and we left it at the county, it would reduce the county tax levy by $27 million. There will be nobody walking away with any more money than there's no hidden agenda to build another building or anything like that. It would reduce the county tax levy for every county taxpayer.
And I might add, each town would share proportionately, as we do today, based upon your share of the assessed value. So in that sense, we've made the full circle here now, haven't we, ladies and gentlemen? But that's okay. That's I'm going to conclude. I'm going to give a concluding remark. I'm a town supervisor, after all, and my concluding remark is this: Bolton, we have always paid our fair share. We will continue to pay our fair share. Net of revenue. If there are things that need to be in the county levy that are not in the county levy, then by all means, legislators, put it in the county levy. And when you do, we will pay our 15.4% of that item. But to take a tax base from 15.4% to 27 or 28% effectively, I'm not going to take any money. I'm not going to vote to take any money from any municipality. That's my position. You got a plan? We'll look at it. But I'm not going to take any money from anyone. I'm not going to vote for any plan that takes any money from anyone. That's just patently wrong. It traumatizes those municipal budgets and those taxpayers and those in the business community. I'm open to all suggestions. I'm interested in the subject. I think I know a little bit about the subject. But we have to be very careful here. We had a slide up there that effectively took a municipality to zero. And another municipality would be paying 300 times what that municipality would be paying toward the county levy. And what we're here for, all those names up on that wall, are to pay for those things that we can't do independently or that we prefer to do collectively. And that is what the county levy is all about. I'm willing to consider anything that you have, but I prefer to consider it as part of the county levy as opposed to turning our tax structure on its head. Now, that's my position, and hopefully we can conclude now and have a motion to adjourn. Mr. Simpson on the adjournment, Andrea Hogan on the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And thank you everyone for coming.